Something that conservatives and liberals both hop on is this idea that looting is beneath us, right? It's all looted from the worker, whether it's like, workers in Haiti selling clothes for Hanes for pennies a day, or whether it's colonized workers here in the United States who pick your fruits and vegetables even during this pandemic. So who really did the real looting, right? Is it the people who are reclaiming their wealth from this this corporation that exacts racist, sexist exploitation on third world peoples, or is it third world peoples standing up and saying enough is enough?
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ramiro with Anticonquista. Anticonquista is an anti-imperialist media collective. Our content is produced by and for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. And today we have the honor of once again having Takiyah Thompson join us. Takiyah is the co-founder of the revolutionary international organization de Trabajadores, also known as RIOT. You can follow them on Twitter at riot_revolt, on Facebook as well, and IG, Riot Revolt. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about George Floyd. We all know what's going on. He was a black man, a 40-year-old black man who was murdered by a white police officer named Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 25th, 2020. And he was, the police officer was kneeling on his neck for at least 7 minutes. And during 3 of those 7 minutes, he was handcuffed. He was lying on the ground, crying for help, crying for any sort of solidarity from people who were looking. And the police officer, of course, ended up murdering him. And now what we're seeing across the country, across the US, is uprisings being led by revolutionary black youth who are manifesting against US imperialism, capitalism, racism, and this whole colonial system. And so I wanted to talk with Takiyah today about what that means for us as revolutionary communists and what a revolutionary black communist perspective is on these uprisings that are taking place. And so Takiyah, thank you so much for joining Anticonquista again.
Of course, yeah, thanks for having me.
So Takiyah, tell me, what were you doing when you found out about George Floyd, and what are your thoughts on his murder and the situation now in terms of the uprisings across the country?
So I think I first learned about the George Floyd stuff through Instagram, through seeing different posts, and like, of course, the video of his murder is floating around out there. I mean, I never watched it, but I did see, screenshots from it and stuff like that. And yeah, just started looking on my Twitter feed and hearing about it. I didn't hear about it the day that he was murdered, but I did hear about what happened the day after. So yeah.
For you personally, as a black person living in the U.S. and probably the most racist country in the world in the history of empires, what has it been like for you, like seeing that video? I know for me, like when I saw that video, I was just so upset, and it was a feeling of upsetness that went straight into my gut, into my stomach. I was fucking disgusted to see that piece of shit, Derek Chauvin, literally having his knee on this guy's neck. And I don't know, how did you feel when you saw that video?
I mean, when I saw it, I just felt like, like I just wondered to myself, like, is this old or is this new? Like, did this just happen, or is this like another incidents like Ahmaud Arbery, where this happened months ago and the video is being leaked now? Like, I was trying to put it together, like, and it's also something that like we've seen time and time and time and time and time again before, like whether it becomes popular and blows up and starts a movement or whatever, or whether these instances of police violence are just, something localized where, just your local community really hears about it. But I mean, it's something we've seen like up close and personal, just in my experience, in my interactions with living in New York before, with the NYPD, one of the most racist, violent police forces in America. I've seen things like this with my own eyes. um, and seeing pictures of it on the local level, it was just, it's just like, in effect, I guess being numb to the reality of it. So I mean, of course, I was disgusted, shocked, but at the same time, it's like, this is just such a routine part of being black in America that it's kind of it's hard to be outraged every time. So I'm not gonna say I'm not outraged. I'm definitely outraged, but I'm definitely feeling like more so like frazzled and wired, just kind of really tapped in and plugged into what's going on, and I guess like hyper attuned to everything that's coming out in regards to the protests there in Minneapolis and across the country. So just feeling really like really wired and really focused on what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I think it was beautiful to see the response by a lot of young black youth across the country who have been organizing protests. I know here in LA, I'm living in LA right now. There was a huge protest that had a lot of young people of color leading it, protesting the police. In Minneapolis, I saw the images of Target being liberated and the police station also being torched, and it was like a scene out of a revolutionary movie, and it just reminded me of the need to support revolutionary uprisings against the US racist capitalist state led by black youth, because this country, the US, was founded on the exploitation, colonization, and slavery of African people from the African continent, the genocide of indigenous people. And so it was just another reminder to me that if, for those of us who want to overturn this unjust, corrupt, capitalist, imperialist system, it has to be led by those young folks, the young people of color who are out on the streets, who had literally nothing to lose but their chains, who are protesting. And I wanted to share a quote with you that I'm sure you're familiar with as well, both of us being communists. And it's a quote by Mao Zedong from 1939, December 20th, at a speech marking the 60th birthday of Stalin from the Soviet Union. And Mao said, quote, "Marxism comprises many principles, but in the final analysis, they can all be brought back to a single sentence. It is right to rebel." And that quote is one that I've seen a lot on social media, that I was personally thinking about a lot as someone who has studied Mao Zedong, as someone who admires the revolutionary work and also admires the black communists in the US, especially the Black Panther Party, who studied Mao and who applied Marxism, Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought to the conditions of the new African people in the US. And so I just wanted to ask you, what is your view on the way that people are rebelling? Because that's what we're seeing now, right? We're seeing the masses organizing spontaneous rebellions across the US. What is your thought on these rebellions, and do you have any critiques of them? And also, what are your thoughts on the liberals who are critiquing the people for organizing protests and fighting back?
So my thoughts on the uprisings going on around the country. Um, yeah, I think a disruption to the everyday business as usual within the plantation disrupts all of America's daily um, neo-colonial activities, right? Because I mean, when you have um, branches of the U.S. military being diverted from their everyday operations to cracking down on revolution within the country, that makes the situation ripe to strike down the empire across the world, right? Because if you look on Twitter, the National Guard for Minneapolis just tweeted that they're sending 500 soldiers into the streets of Minneapolis to crush this uprising. Um, and we've seen this happen before in Ferguson, right? When the military is preoccupied with putting down rebellions here, it can't enforce its will on the rest of the world. So I think it's important to understand that this would be, this is very strategic, right? Like this uprising is very strategic, and like it has long term implications for not just what's going on here in America, but for what's going on across the world. So, um, yeah, I think these uprisings are, definitely striking fear into the heart of the empire. Definitely, having to reassess their global game and having to reassess, what they're doing here. So I think the uprisings are positive all in all. I don't think I could have a critique for it really. I mean, I saw that 7 protesters in Louisville last night were shot. I mean, obviously by the police. Let's just let's just go ahead and clear the air on that one. So I think it's important that we are doing everything that we can to protect ourselves and to stay safe. Um, yeah, because we know that the backlash to this is going to be very violent and very brutal. I think not really a critique I have, but more like an analysis. As we've seen in the past, with Ferguson and so many activists, um, suffering these horrific deaths under mysterious circumstances. I think we have to be careful, and we have to remember that you know the state is gonna crack down, and there's gonna be repercussions. So I think that's just something that we have to keep in mind, and practice um, best practices around security culture, and keeping each other safe when we go out to these protests. So
Yeah, and I think it's really exposed also the bullshit of both the liberals and conservatives. Like you, I'm also a communist, and we understand the state to be an instrument of class rule by the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, the white settler class here in the United States, to dominate the poor black and brown communities that from which they extract their resources and labor. And so, like, from the conservatives, it's exposed their bullshit in terms of trying to act like they're against the state, right? Because literally just a few days before, you had all these white nationalists, these right wingers, these white guys with like beer bellies and fucking like the shirts with like the snake or whatever, who are like, we need to take our country back and open up the economy and da da da, and we're rebellious and we have guns and going up to state capitals. And now they're all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we love the police, like we love the state, we need to bring order. And it's just complete bullshit, because it's like these are the people, unfortunately, who are winning the hearts and minds of young people in the US, who try to portray like libertarians and right wingers as like rebellious and we're going against the state. But when shit like this happens, time and time again, they always side with the police. And now on the other side, with liberals, it's also exposed their lack of understanding of force, like the theory of force, because they view the US and US society as being in a state of equilibrium. So when they see revolutionary youth from the hood, from the barrios coming out and liberating Target, taking back the resources and wealth that is theirs to begin with, and torching this police station that's a symbol of colonization, of invasion on their land, the liberals are acting like they're the ones initiating force, that they're the ones who are creating violence, when the war against black and brown people in the US has already existed since 1492. And so, from both the liberal and conservative end, we've seen both of their bullshit understanding of US imperialism just totally collapse. And I was just wondering what you thought about that as well.
well, I think the thing that I've thought about most is just um, people who talk about the looting. I think that's just the main thing that I've been thinking about, because that's something that conservatives and liberals both hop on, is this idea that looting is beneath us, right? But looting is not beneath us. When we talk about the things that were looted out of the Target, the electronics, the food, whatever, what have you, I mean, it's all looted from it's all looted from the worker, whether it's like workers in Haiti selling clothes for Hanes for pennies a day, or whether it's the workers here in the United States, the colonized workers here in the United States, who pick your fruits and vegetables even during this pandemic. All of that stuff is looted. So who really did the real looting, right? Is it the people who are reclaiming their wealth from this this corporation that exacts racist, sexist exploitation on third world peoples, or is it third world peoples standing up and saying enough is enough, right? So that's kind of my analysis of looting, and I think when we talk about the similarities between conservatives and liberals, I think that's one of the things that really stands out to me is this notion of like corporate of white looting being okay, right? Basically, of white looting, because it's not just like the corporation. I mean, just like look around. We're in a stolen nation, right? Like the land that your car outside is parked on, like the land that your house is built on, right? So when we talk about looting, we have to talk about like really who started all the looting, right? And I thought it was kind of funny when Trump last night tweeted that when the looting starts, the shooting starts, and I'm just like, damn, like imagine if black, indigenous, and colonized people had that same outlook. I mean, there'd be no whites left.
Yeah, it's true, and they're always going to defend their interests no matter what. Time and time again, they'll trick us into following their rules, and that's part of the game, right? Like, for example, the Roman Empire, they had this concept called, I think it was called the noble lie. And the Romans, what they would do is when they would colonize new areas for their empire, they would make the colonized people feel like they were part of their empire and make them follow the rule. And the lie was that if they participated in these rules, that they would get a slice of the loot that was extracted from other places with the empire. But ultimately, when those colonized areas began demanding more and demanding more independence, then the Roman authorities would step in and suppress and shoot them. I mean, not shoot them, like spear them and attack them. And we're seeing something very similar with the U.S., where it's like these white settlers in the U.S. who are right wingers and also liberals as well, who are like, "Come on, guys, play nice. How dare you loot Target? Like, don't affect private property." But then it's like the second, like they've been doing that shit, and they're just better at hiding it, And they loot every day, every hour of every day of the week from even our countries across the global south, where they extract resources and labor. That's looting. They're looting with a shirt and tie. They're looting with commodities under capitalism. And so I'm so glad that you pointed that out, because it's like we have, as communists, it's also our job to like explain to people that what's going on now with the images of people going to Target and getting the materials they need, they're not initiating force. They're not looting. They're simply taking back what belongs to them. And I think it's so important moving forward to have that vision. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you respond to black liberals who are trying to act as pacifiers of these uprisings going on? Like, I think I saw something from Ilhan Omar earlier that, she was critiquing it, the shooting, obviously, but she was saying, like, we need peace, we need like tranquility. Like, how do you respond to someone like that?
I saw the funniest tweet in response to that Ilhan Omar tweet, and someone was like, yeah, you need to log off and go listen to your daughter, because I don't know if you follow her daughter on Twitter, but her daughter is like a little baby communist, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's funny that these liberals are like, at the same time we need peace, but I see it and I hear it, but I think it's like so irrelevant, just especially in this moment, because yeah, that rhetoric is out there, but I think overwhelmingly, at least the everyday black people that I come in contact with, that I organize with, that I've get to know, have conversations with on the street, we're all sick of the bullshit, right? We're all sick of like you know trying to be the good Negro for them, right? Following the rules, or you know, acting with deference or whatever. We're pretty much tired of that, and um, I feel like the black people who are I can't say pro peace, but who are pro bowing down. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, the black people who are, really into that respectability is like becoming fewer and fewer. I think so many of my peers and like I mean even older people, 10, 20, 30 years my senior are like really fed up because I mean even when you think about people like black people, you know, I think as a whole in terms of like the black community, I think we underestimate how radical or revolutionary our elders are. So at the same time, you have those people who do subscribe to this idea that we have to respect ourselves first before we can get respect. But at the same time, you also have black people in our community who grew up in an era where their family members or people in their town were lynched in the classical sense of lynching that we think of when we say lynching, who are now moving into this new era, and the lynching has never stopped. It's just taken a new form. So I think of course there's that slogan like the kids will be okay, but I think also we underestimate how okay our elders are also, even though this liberal respectability current is really strong. I think it really is weakening in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. And even like I was talking about this with Ophelia, my girlfriend. We were talking about how 2020 is means like perfect vision, right? Like 2020 means you have 2020 vision means you have clear vision. And there's so much symbolism too because we're also in the middle of COVID-19 of the pandemic and like the whole concept of like the mask, right? And I feel like in many ways the mask is falling off of US imperialism and our vision is becoming clear of what the system really means and who these liberals are who act and talk and dress like us, and try to pacify our people. And it's just interesting because I think you're totally right. More people are seeing behind the veneer of these tokens, right? Like, I'm a very huge critic of AOC, for example, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, because I think her role within the Democratic Party is to kind of like they're kind of like the outfielders, right? They're identifying like who are the radical people, who are the radical bases, and how do we bring them back into the Democratic Party? How do we bring them back into the capitalist imperialist system by trying to talk like them and act like them? And more, I'm seeing that, for example, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we found out that Ilhan Omar is supporting like AIPAC and Israel, and that Alexandria Ocasio Cortez was, supporting like these right wing Venezuelans by the Defense Act. And so, like, the veneer is falling off and they're being exposed for the tokens of imperialism that they are. And I think it's a very clarifying moment. And so, what do you expect to see, like, in the coming weeks and months, or even for the rest of the year, now that this has ignited that people are protesting across the country in defense, in solidarity with George Floyd and all Black people, but also the fact that the U.S. has the worst COVID-19 response in the world? Like, what do you expect to see in the next few weeks or months?
I don't know. It's hard to say like like an expectation. I love Twitter. I mean, I saw this, so I'm gonna reference Twitter again. I mean, I saw this tweet that was basically saying that like in the future, the chapter on 2020 is gonna be long as hell. So I don't know. I don't know if I can really say I expect anything because, I mean, I really, for example, I didn't expect like, this murder that took place in Minnesota to spark protests in like a handful of cities. I mean, I guess for anybody watching that doesn't know or is maybe like overseas or whatever, I mean, protests were in Minnesota, Ohio, Kentucky, Oakland, Los Angeles, Colorado, Phoenix, New York. So I mean, like literally across the country from west to east coast. So I mean, I didn't expect that at all, especially with this pandemic going on. I thought maybe people would be too afraid to hit the streets, or whatever, what have you. I thought people just would be caught off guard by this and not really ready to mobilize, and that really surprised me. And another thing, I mean, to speak to the unpredictability of the historical moment that we're in, I mean, Iran breaking or defying the U.S. sanctions along with Venezuela, and the Venezuelan Navy and Air Force like daring America to start some shit. So I mean, where the U.S. empire goes is really questionable. I mean, in the past, it would be easy to say, oh, well, they're just going to invade such and such an area. They're just going to drone strike this. They're going to, crack down on that. But now it's really questionable because, the American military in this moment has to respond to this domestic uprising at the same time as, major global powers acting in like tremendous shows of solidarity. I mean, not just now. I mean, over the past year or two, collaboration between Venezuela and Russia, collaboration between Venezuela and China. America's it's looking back into a corner, and like, I mean, even just like 3 or 4 years ago, I would say, you know, revolution in our lifetime with an asterisk, which basically says like, this is like a hope and a prayer. But nowadays, like I say the slogan and I hear it, revolution in our lifetime, and I'm like, damn, maybe so. Some, I don't know if I could predict anything, but looking at the things that have already happened and just like assessing the historical moment that we're in, I'm just like really hopeful.
That's so true. And even within the context of the US election, because the tokens are going to try to have us vote for Joe Biden, and everybody fucking hates Joe Biden. Like, no, I don't think there's very few people, except for a few whites in Washington, D.C., who can seriously tell us, like, yeah, you should vote for Joe Biden, who's a fucking pedophile, who's a fucking rapist, a violator. And so the Democrat Party is weak. The Republicans, Trump acts like the tough guy, a strong man, that he can manage everything. And it seems like he's also losing control. The Republicans are losing control. And I think I'm so glad you mentioned the fact of the interconnection between uprisings in the belly of the beast and also uprisings in the global south, because it's like it's going to need both. Both are going to be needed in order to overturn the U.S. imperialist system. In the same way that, like, during the Vietnam War, when it was quote unquote French Indochina, that there was like protests going on in France against the government, and also the Vietnamese people were rising up against French colonialism, and throughout history as well. Like, whenever an empire has colonized other areas around the world, whenever the colonized area stands up and fights back, and also colonized people in the diaspora stand up and fight back against the empire, that usually signifies kind of the end of one empire and the turning of the page. And I think it's so fitting that all of this is happening just days after African Liberation Day, which was May 25th, Monday, after Malcolm X's birthday anniversary. And there's this awakening, I think, of Black and colonized people in the U.S. that has always existed from day one, but that is interlinking these struggles with struggles around the world. And I think that's the only way movements like these can have a long-standing effect, is to build solidarity with movements around the world, to be like, yo, the same way that you guys are fighting against white supremacy and police brutality in the U.S., people in Venezuela are also fighting against U.S. imperialism that's being perpetrated by the same racist state that's affecting Black and brown people in Venezuela with sanctions, with violence. And so the internationalist solidarity is so key. And for someone who is new to all of this, for any young Black and brown colonized youth who are taking part in these protests or are supportive of the protests, what advice would you give them in terms of getting involved, and also in terms of like understanding the broader picture?
So in terms of getting involved, I see popularly this slogan that's like join an organization. But I think I would amend that. Like, if you're a Black, Indigenous, colonized youth, you need to join an organization explicitly for Black, Indigenous, and colonized youth. I think because one of the mistakes that I've made, and I feel like a lot of people that I consider comrades to this day have made, is entering the movement through the nonprofit industrial complex, or entering the movement through settler leftist organizations. And I think, I think uh, in a lot of ways, white leftists and white radicals, are there in a broader sense. But I think when we talk about the the microaggressions, and when I say that word, I don't mean like little acts of racism, because I understand that all racism is racism, but I'm talking about this like interpersonal racism, this micro racism that goes unchecked, I think, frequently in these organizations. And I think combating that everyday racism, along with this larger struggle against these racist structures, it it's draining, and it limits what you're able to do, right? It limits your productivity, because it's hard to fight the empire when you're trying to educate and like reform white people in your own organization all the time. You know what I'm saying? Or entering the movement through nonprofit work. I mean, nonprofits definitely have their role. I think when we look around at a lot of the major bail funds, it's like, basically nonprofits, right? So I think that's the dialectic, that it serves its role, but in a lot of ways, these structures recreate exactly what we're trying to dismantle. So I would stay away from, maybe not stay away, but definitely investigate any nonprofit that you become involved with, that you give your funds to. So I mean, definitely, if you're leaning that way, definitely try to look into some Black nonprofits and some colonized organizations, nonprofits, and things like that. And I think in terms of another thing, in terms of like getting organized, I think this whole revolution thing, this whole communism thing, is like a two-pronged struggle. Like we have to kill off this new system, but we also have to build something else to replace it, right? So while we're struggling against this system, we have to build things that reduce people's reliance on the state, right? So in terms of like mutual aid, feeding our communities, I feel like these things are like paramount. I mean, uh, it's one of the most popular things that we know about the Black Panther Party, right? I mean, I feel like besides being like fetishized for the leather and the guns, right? I think most people who've done a little bit of research at least know about the breakfast program, right? Because this is something vital that our communities need, or people who know about the pop up clinics, basically doing testing for. I think they used to test for like diabetes and things like that, blood pressure and stuff like that. So stuff like that is important. Building structures that reduce our reliance on the state. So another example of that is like our reliance on police to keep us safe, right? In times of crisis and emergency, calling on the police. But an alternative to that is like building these de-escalation trainings, de-escalation task forces that go out and try to resolve conflicts within our community, to where we don't feel like we have to call the police. Or something like what we're doing, RIOT is doing now, is like the urban farming gardening initiative, building alternatives to relying on big food, which is, I mean, if you look around, even in America, through food stamps and WIC, and I mean, food is used to control populations, right? I mean, whether we look at like slash and burn techniques to try to cow First Nation peoples into submission in the conquering of the land in the United States, or whether they do that in Haiti or wherever else, they exact this violence on using Agent Orange in Vietnam and other parts of Asia. Having food sovereignty is highly important. So I would, to young revolutionaries who are getting involved, I'd say yes, absolutely. Like, you know, loot. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead, do it. Like, yes, looting is good. Looting is good, burning is good, right? Target the things that target the things that this society values over your life, of course, right? We support that 1,000%, but also we have to be building things that that replace what we're tearing down, because if not, I mean, that's what they do. That's their culture, is destruction and pillaging and not building shit of value to anyone, right? So we have to reject that. So in rejecting that, we also have to build something that's sustainable, that's for us.
Yo, that's so well said, because so many times people on the left, communists, especially black and brown communists, we get painted as like hoodlums, bandits. We just want to tear shit down. And that's part of it. Like you said, in any revolutionary process, part of it is revolting, is standing up, fighting back, and taking back. But that's the first step. The second step, like you said, is building, is constructing. And that's what communism is all about. And that's what black communists, especially on the continent of Africa, have promoted. Amilcar Cabral, Thomas Sankara, building sustainable agriculture, becoming less reliant on Europe and the imperialist countries for food and technology. And I think that's so important. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do feel that that point needs to be emphasized a little more. I don't want to sound like those liberals who are like, oh, looting is bad. I support liberating those resources and taking them back. But just like you said, it's so important equally to put out that we are builders. We're construction, building socialism, and building ways for our people to survive, to be sustainable. And even the work that y'all are doing as RIOT in North Carolina is such a perfect example of that with sustainable agriculture, because part of the war on black and brown and colonized people in the US that is almost never talked about is food. Just like you said, food. Like, they're literally killing us. They make money from commercials, right, that have no value, that make us want poison that they feed to us, to babies, that we buy. We're paying to buy their poison that kills us, that gives us diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. And we're seeing it happen right now with COVID, where the highest death rates are black and brown people in the US and indigenous people, because they're forced to eat this shitty food. They're forced to eat food that is literally poison, that is cheap, that is not good for us, while you have these white liberals who are like sipping $12 lattes that are like organic and shit, and they get the good food, right? And it goes back, and it's so sophisticated, because it's like colonization. Like, it's so, you kind of have to have special glasses to really understand it, because there's so many levels to it, right? It's like there's food, there's the state. They want us to play by their rules while they're secretly killing us in an untold genocide, by eating food that's bad for us, by doing all these things, and taking our jobs away from us. Like, for example, even on Staten Island, with Eric Garner, it's like he was selling. What was he doing? He was selling Lucy's, right? And it just shows you that, like, the capitalist system, because it's not able to provide people with good livelihoods, good jobs for black and brown folks, they have to resort to doing that. And so we have to understand it through a systemic lens. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. Just to kind of wrap up, what I wanted to ask you is, what books or podcasts do you recommend to young black and brown colonized youth who are interested in learning more about revolutionary history, examples from our ancestors, our people in the past who have led uprisings like this? What sort of material is good for people to be reading right now or listening to?
Okay, so that's so funny, that because I was just preparing to make a post about The Spook Who Sat by the Door by Sam Greenlee. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's about, this CIA agent who is a black man who's like one of the first CIA agents, and he gets into the CIA, and he thinks he's like, basically any colonized person who goes to join the empire is basically like, yes, I'm gonna win my seat at the table here, and he gets there, and then he's just like a desk accessory, right? He just sits at a desk all day, blah blah blah. But it's about how this guy turns around and leads a clandestine guerrilla warfare in Chicago after leaving the CIA and training some folks from the hood in Chicago. And I just recommend that book because if you're ever feeling like we can't win and like, you know, feeling real defeated, it's a really happy ending. So that's why I recommend that book a lot, because it just mirrors everything that we're going through. Another book I would recommend, this is probably going to be like theory, nonfiction, is Wretched of the Earth, Franz Fanon. I feel like it's a timeless classic. A lot of people spend a lot of time focusing on the first chapter, but I mean that book is just like a fountain of quotables, a fountain of like knowledge. I mean, every time I go back and read that book, I mean, I feel like I'm highlighting something different. And lastly, no, two more. Okay, two more. So right now, for the book club, we are going to be reading Discourse on Colonialism, which is going to be June 1st at 6 p.m. You can check that out on the Riot Revolt Library. I'll send you a link to it. So you can check that out. It's Discourse on Colonialism by Ames Césaire. It talks about the effects of colonialism on the colonizer and the colonized subject. And it also briefly touches on the importance of the Holocaust. What does the Holocaust mean to the colonized subject, right? And lastly, what we're going to be reading for our next book club meeting, hopefully, is going to be Mao Zedong on guerrilla warfare. So we're going to be reading that next. So those are four good pieces of reading. As far as podcasts go, I'm not really too sure about that, but those are four pieces of good reading I would recommend to anyone.
That's what's up. And on my reading list, I haven't gotten to it yet, but is To Die for the People, Huey Newton. That's one. I've been trying to read more Huey Newton and literature from the Black Panther Party, because that's who people should be studying in the U.S. Like, unfortunately, when we talk about the left in the U.S., they're like, oh, you should read about the 1892 white people strike in Manhattan. It's like, nah, read the Panthers. You know what I'm saying? Read the Panthers, read Asada, because again, time and time again, any revolutionary momentum or movement in the U.S., the closest that revolution has ever come in the U.S., has been led and organized by Black and brown people. And so that's who we should be studying. And in my opinion, I think the Panthers were one of the most advanced communist groups in the U.S. And so I'm aiming to read some of their work, and there's so much to read and to really take in. But Takiyah, thank you so much for joining us. How can people follow Riot again on social media?
Yeah, so check us out on Instagram, Riot_Revolt. We're also on Twitter with the same handle, Riot_Revolt. And you can check out our news articles and blog posts. Also, we have a website, riotrevolt.org.
And for those who are listening and watching, again, my name is Ramiro. I'm a co-editor of Anticonquista. Anticonquista is an anti-imperialist media collective for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. Go to our website, anticonquista.com, or follow us on social media at Anticonquista. Peace out, Takiyah. Peace out, y'all who are listening and watching, and have a great day.